How is everybody doing? Welcome back to another episode of The Banker Next Door. I am your host, Dr. Joe Berquist. With all the talk in the media recently about tariffs, I really wanted to do an episode focused in on this. I wanted to explain what are tariffs. I also wanted to talk about the U.S. trade deficit and how that in particular plays into the tariffs. Because I think when people understand the U.S. trade deficit, they will understand the strategy for the tariffs and why we are trying to rectify this massive imbalance in trade that the country currently has. Now, in the news media, like on MSNBC, whether it be not MSNBC, I'm sorry, CNBC, Fox Business, Bloomberg, the financial news media, if you will. Tariffs are the big boogeyman, and it's like, oh, we can't have tariffs. Like, oh, the tariffs are just wreck the economy, and they kind of have one of the biggest jokes there is in the news media is this concept of free trade. To set the record straight right out of the gate, we do not have free trade. What we have is everybody else gets free trade, and the United States gets bent over the table. Okay, and I hate to say that as kind of crudely as that is, but that's the truth. The U.S. gets used and abused by everybody else. Everybody else gets a great deal, but they slap us with tariffs and everything else. And for some reason, the lovely folks in the financial news media just can't seem to figure out this concept. They don't understand that all these other countries hit us and bury us with tariffs, but we, for some reason, are not allowed to do that back to them. And so I want to talk about this, and we're going to look at a couple different articles today. And this is what we're looking at. This is what I'm talking about right here. So the countries driving America's 1.2 trillion trade deficit in goods. So this is really bad. So basically, this is the monthly balance of U.S. trade in goods, and this is going from 2000 to our current position. And in January 2025, we had a $153 billion deficit. That is really bad. And one way that you could consider this is that the U.S. used to be the greatest creditor nation in the world, meaning we used to play the role of China. We exported everything out to everybody else because we had this giant manufacturing power base, and we exported everything. And then we have ceded that to China. We've exported all of that manufacturing of consumer goods, of medicines, of everything over to China in the last 30, 35 years. And thus, this has left us, and now you could consider us a debtor nation partially because of this huge trade imbalance. But before we dive into this, I want to take a look at a couple things real quick. So what are tariffs and how do they affect you personally? So what are tariffs? A tariff is a type of tax levied by a country on an imported good at the border. Historically, tariffs have been used by governments to collect additional revenue, but they are also a way for governments to try to protect domestic producers. As a protectionist tool, a tariff increases the price of imports. Due to that, consumers may choose to buy other relatively less expensive domestic goods instead. Key takeaways. Tariffs are duties on imports imposed by governments to raise revenue, protect domestic industries, or exert political leverage over another country. Tariffs often result in unwanted side effects, such as higher consumer prices. Tariffs have a long and contentious history, and the debate over whether they represent good or bad policy rages on to this day. So understanding tariffs real quick. So in today's global economy, many products made in a home country consist of parts obtained from other countries, or these products might have been assembled overseas. As a result, tariffs can affect the prices of products made in the home country as well as those imported from other countries. Many economists argue that tariffs create market distortions that can harm domestic consumers over time. They can also lead to a trade war if trading partners impose tit-for-tat tariffs. The process of setting tariffs rates involves a combination of economic, political, and strategic issues. Governments engage in complex negotiations and considerations of reciprocity with trading partners. And then it gets into kind of how a tariff works, reasoning for tariffs. Governments may impose tariffs to raise revenue or protect domestic industries, especially nascent ones, from foreign competition. By making foreign produced goods more expensive, tariffs can make domestically produced alternatives more attractive. Oh, that's interesting. In other words, bringing the manufacturing base back to America so that we produce the goods and services, right? All right, so now let's take a look at balance of trade, BOT, definition, calculation, and examples. So what is balance of trade? Balance of trade is the difference between the value of a country's exports and the value of a country's imports for a given period. Balance of trade is the largest component of a country's balance of payments. Sometimes the balance of trade between a country's goods and the balance of trade between its services are distinguished as two separate figures. The balance of trade is also referred to as the trade balance, the international trade balance, the commercial balance, or the net exports. So some of the key takeaways here. So balance of trade is the difference between the value of a country's imports and exports for a given period and is the largest components of a country's balance of payments. This plays into our GDP. A country that imports more goods and services than it exports in terms of value has a trade deficit, i.e. the U.S., what we currently have, while a country that exports more goods and services than it imports has a trade surplus. So viewed alone, the balance of trade is not sufficient to gauge the health of an economy. It is important to consider the balance of trade with respect to other economic indicators, business cycles, and other indicators. The United States regularly runs a trade deficit, while China usually runs a large trade surplus. Okay, pretty straightforward to understand there. So, and then it gets into kind of calculating the balance of trade. People can go look at that. The balance of trade is simply equals exports minus imports. So we're not going to get. So now let's get back to this for just a second. But before we actually get back to this, I want to look at this article real quick from the Epoch Times. So import surge drives U.S. trade deficit to record high in January. So an economist warns that the widening deficit is a symptom of deeper economic problems. The U.S. over-reliance on consumption and imported goods. Let me say that again, U.S. over-reliance on consumption and imported goods. So the U.S. trade deficit reached a record high in January on a surge of imports, with President Donald Trump vowing to reverse the trend by curbing foreign goods and boosting domestic production. The Commerce Department's Bureau of Economic Analysis announced on March 6th that America's trade gap with the world surged 34% in January to an all-time high of $131 billion, up from $89 billion in December. Imports surged 10%, the sharpest increase since July of 2020 to $401.2 billion, while goods imports jumped 12.3% to a record $329 billion. The rise in imports was largely driven by industrial supplies and materials, which increased $23 billion, with $20.5 billion coming from finished metal shapes, including gold bars. If so, more than half of January's import spike may have been due to gold shipments, analysts say. Trump, a longtime critic of America's trade imbalances, blamed the trend on his predecessor, President Joe Biden, who was in office before his presidency. Massive trade deficit with the world just announced, I will change that. So while Trump did not outline specific policy actions in his post, he has consistently championed tariffs as an effective tool to reduce the trade deficit and reshore American manufacturing by discouraging imports and incentivizing domestic production. While tariffs can shift trade flows and reduce imports in the short term, some economists argue that deeper fiscal and exchange rate policies have a more lasting impact on trade balances. President Donald Trump would have more success in reducing the U.S. trade deficit by reducing the fiscal deficit and pushing down the overvalued dollar than by raising tariffs. The Peterson Institute for International Economics wrote in a recent note. Well, why can't he do both? Why can't he do both? Why does it have to be an either or? Pi basically said that smaller fiscal deficits help lower interest rates and weaken the dollar. Yes, that's true. That in turn makes imports more expensive and exports cheaper to foreigners, shrinking the trade deficit or increasing the trade surplus, the group said. Meanwhile, economist Peter Schiff warned that the widening deficit is a symptom of a deeper economic problem, America's over-reliance on consumption and imported goods. Americans will soon find out the hard way the downside of decades of outsourcing manufacturing and living off trade deficits goods and the dollar's reserve status, Schiff wrote in a post on X. The coming days of reckoning is long overdue. I hope that when the financial crisis hits, we finally do the right thing. Schiff has long advocated for a shift toward domestic production, higher savings, and reduced government spending, both to address the trade gap and for sustainable long-term growth. The record trade deficit combined with weaker consumer spending has raised concerns about an economic slowdown. The Atlanta Federal Reserve now projects the U.S. gross domestic product GDP will shrink at an annualized rate of 2.4% in the first quarter, with the sharp rise in imports acting as the biggest drag on growth. However, if the January import surge was a temporary pre-tariff rush rather than a sustained trend, the trade deficit could narrow in the coming months, potentially leading to an upward revision in GDP estimates. So, okay, so now I want to look at a couple of so let's take a look at just this for a second. So this is East Asia and the Pacific. U.S. balance of trade in goods in 2024 among top regional trade partners. So you could see the deficit here. Obviously, the biggest one with China, 295 billion, Taiwan, 74, Japan, 68, South Korea, 66, Thailand, 46, Vietnam, 123 billion, Malaysia, 25 billion, Indonesia, 18 billion. And then who do we have a surplus with? Basically, Hong Kong. We have a 22 billion surplus. Australia, we have a surplus. Singapore. So you could see here some pretty big trade imbalance with East Asia and the Pacific, most notably with China. And now you begin to understand why President Trump put these tariffs on China, because these guys are the number one target right now, so to speak. Okay, now let's go down. Let's look at the Americas. So Canada, we have a 63 billion trade deficit. And with Mexico, we have $172 billion, the second largest goods trade deficit behind China. Okay, now is this starting? Now that you see the numbers, this is starting to make sense. Why China, Canada, and Mexico were the first three countries targeted because of how large of a trade deficit we have with these three countries. The surplus, Panama, Brazil, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, El Salvador, Argentina, Bahamas, Peru, Chile, Colombia, Honduras. So we have surpluses with all those countries, and we are actually going to have El Salvador, particularly El Salvador and Argentina. We're working out deals with them right now, which are going to be a net positive to both countries. Which I think that's where ultimately we want to get to. We want to get to a more balanced, like example with Mexico, right? It's $172 billion trade deficit at the moment. Well, if we could cut that in half or get that down to 50 billion, wouldn't that be a great thing? And at the same time, have them start to buy a lot more stuff from us. I think if you can at least reducing that is a great thing. Now let's take a look at Europe. Who are some of the big players in Europe? We have Switzerland, 38 billion, Italy, 44 billion, Ireland, 87 billion, Germany, 85 billion. And believe me, the tariffs on Europe, they're coming. But we have a surplus with the Netherlands, 56 billion. We have a little bit of a surplus with the UK, with Spain, and with Belgium. So obviously the three big targets right now: China, Canada, Mexico, and then the EU, if you will. That's coming. That's the next one that's coming. But you could see how massive these trade deficits are, and again, you can't have this conversation on tariffs without understanding the trade deficit, the import-export imbalance that we have in this country right now. And I thought that, and again, this goes into like Middle East or whatever. We're not really going to spend a lot of time with there. We've actually working out some deals with India right now, which is great. But then you can see like type of good here, machinery, obviously a huge one, electrical equipment, vehicles, pharmaceutical products, apparel, furniture and bedding, iron and steel, toys and game, footwear, beverages, spirits and vineyards, pearls, precious metals, stones, aluminum, plastics, mineral fuels and oil, aircraft. I mean, it's just huge. But this was just a fantastic article here from the Wall Street Journal, just pointing out. And again, it all comes back to this massive trade imbalance that hit a record of 153 billion. And even if you're able to back this off, right? Say in the next couple of months, say you get it back down to 100 billion, it's still a massive deficit that we, right now the annual deficit is $1.2 trillion annual deficit. I mean, that's crazy. So again, what President Trump is trying to accomplish with these tariffs is just to try to even the scales here a little bit. It's trying to balance this out. And when you understand this, and like I said, the whole concept here to understand is this reality that we do not have free trade. Okay. And anybody that comes at you and says, well, wait a minute, we have free trade around the globe. No, we do not. The US, our exports are so little because everybody else clobbers us with tariffs. Okay. China clobbers us with tariffs. The EU clobbers us with tariffs. Canada, Mexico, all clobbering us with tariffs. But yet, the minute that we go to put tariffs on somebody else, that can't have it, can't exist. And they might get mad at us and they might put a trade war. You know what I say? Bring it on. Bring on the trade war. Let them, because here's the thing. They need us more than we need them. Okay. What you have to understand, all of the cards are in the United States' favor. Once, you put these tariffs on Mexico, for example, Mexico, 70% of their economy relies on the exports to the United States. Okay. We put a 25% tariff on them. That almost guarantees that they're going into a recession. How long is that going to last? How long is that pain going to last before they come back to the table and they want to make a major deal that is going to dramatically even out that trade imbalance? So, and again, these things take time, and that's not to say that there won't be some short-term pain in the short term while all this stuff is playing out. But I truly believe that this strategy of using these tariffs as leverage to bring this trade imbalance back into play, to bring more domestic production and manufacturing back to the United States, create more U.S. jobs, even out prices on certain products. You have to remember, certain prices on certain products will go up, but other prices on other things will come down. So it will have a balancing effect over time. So, so again, I just think that if people understand the numbers here and they understand these arguments, they will understand the tariff thing a little bit better, and they will understand it's not the big boogeyman that the financial news media makes it out to be. So hopefully that really helps. Hopefully this helps to give people a little bit better understanding as to what is happening. And hopefully you could take this information and you can go back with a better understanding of what's going on and have maybe some better conversations with some of your neighbors, friends, coworkers, family members, that kind of thing. So, but anyway, I will wrap up by saying, if you like this episode, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe, as that really helps the channel. Remember, we are on YouTube, Rumble, and all major podcast platforms. Please be sure to leave your comments down below, and I would love to hear your comments on this one. And as always, make sure to check out some of the episodes on the channel. And don't forget, tomorrow night, BND Strategy Room live at 8 o'clock, live stream here on YouTube. Please come on and check it out. That's my main show on the channel, where we cover hit all the main topics and highlights for the week. Would love to see you then. But until then, have a great day, and I'll see everybody real soon. Thanks a lot.